رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. الحمد لله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. آمين رب العالمين. أما بعد، قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. إن الله يرضى لرضا فاطمة ويغضب لغضبها. صدق النبي وآمنا به. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه ولعن أعداءه. أحبائي, for tonight's lecture, a great part is going to be spent on recounting the narrative and the sequence of events that led to the final days of the life of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen, and recounting the narrative for the manner in which she was buried and she gave her final will and testament. Before we begin recounting this narrative, one point of contemplation and a statement of truth and fact. It is important for the Muslims across the globe to ask themselves this fundamental question: why is it that the grave of the daughter of Rasulullah, who is Ashraful Anbiya, why is the grave of this woman who is the daughter of Rasulullah, Ashraful Anbiya, who with ittifaq bayn al-amma wal-khassa is the master of the women of Jannah, why is this woman who is so elevated in her status, why is her grave unknown to the Muslims and to the world? She passed away in the city of Medina. Her house was right next to Masjidun Nabawi. It is not as if she went on a journey to a destination that was unknown and on the way passed away and was buried in a place where the mark of her grave or the gravesite was obliterated over time. Abadan la. This personality who played the central role in the development of Islam and in the growth of Islam, passed away in the city of Medina while living in a house that was attached to Masjidun Nabawi, a household, and the dwellers of this household who were no strangers to the people of Medina. How is it that she was buried and her grave is unknown? Why? This is a fundamental question for every Muslim to ask themselves if they claim to have love, if they claim to have love for Rasulullah. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Because again, in the books of the Amma and the Khassa, undisputed hadith, where the Prophet of Islam declares, Fatima bada'atun minni. Fatima is a piece of me. Without a shadow of the doubt, ittifaq between the Amma and the Khassa, that this daughter of Rasulullah, Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam, was one of the individuals who is referred to in the Quran in the ayah of Tathir, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. For it becomes an obligation upon everybody who recites the Quran, everybody who's memorized the Quran, everyone who comes across this verse of the Quran. When you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has purified this household, and you identify who the people of the household are, you go back and you trace their lifestyles, and you trace and you see their lives and their deaths. And the first question is, where is the grave of this woman? Who is so central to Islam? The reality is that she did not want the ones who orchestrated the madrasa of Saqifa and nor their followers. She neither wanted the orchestrators of Saqifa nor the followers of Saqifa to be present in her funeral. Neither did she want them to stand over her grave as a mark of protest for the injustice that was done to her and the injustice that was done to Amirul Mu'mineen, and in essence the injustice that was done to the deen of Rasulullah, the deen of Allah propagated by Rasulullah. And the narrations refer back to Kitab Sulaim bin Qais al-Hilali. The authenticity of the book of Kitab Sulaim is something that we have discussed in previous lectures. And the words of the ulama, the fuqaha, al-abrar, al-atqiya are there for everyone to see and witness. This Kitab Sulaim, which is one of our most ancient, authentic books of hadith. This Kitab Sulaim, which is considered to be an asl from the usul. This Kitab Sulaim, on which generation after generation, grand maraja and the ulama have referred back to Kitab Sulaim. This Kitab Sulaim that Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi states that it is a secret from the secrets of Ahlul Bayt. I advise to myself, and my advice to you is refer back to Kitab Sulaim to get a firm and a grounded understanding of what happened after the martyrdom of Rasulullah. Within Kitab Sulaim, it is narrated that it was the will of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen as a protest and such that this unknown grave and this hidden grave may become a source for generations until the end of time to research the truth and to seek the truth in regards to ideology and the true path of Islam. The narrations mention she didn't want any of them to stand over her grave or to attend her funeral. For within Kitab Sulaym it is mentioned that as Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam upheld the testament of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen, he went and he dug 40 graves in Jannatul Baqi'. And 40 graves, freshly dug graves, he covered them and sprayed them with water. And the following morning, the orchestrators, the Jibt and the Taghut and the other shayateen of Saqifa, when they awaken in the morning and the news is brought to them that Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen was buried in the darkness of the night and none of them had the opportunity to recite salat over her or to participate in her procession, funeral procession. Refer back to Kitab Sulaym. The narrations mention that the Jibt and the Taghut were overcome with rage and they issued a command and they got women from the Ansar and the Muhajirin and they tasked them to exhume the pure body of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra by digging up the 40 graves until they exhume the body, they find the body, exhume the body of Sayeda Zahra, and in this manner they will forcefully conduct the funeral prayers. And the narrations mention that when this word reached Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Madhloom, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, his eyes red with grief and red with anger. At this point, he put on his robe, a yellow-colored robe that was one which he specifically wore during time of battle. And he took his dhul-fiqar and he marched out of his house towards Jannatul Baqi', stood by the 40 graves with his dhul-fiqar, and he challenged the Jibt and the Taghut to move a single stone from the earth, and he would send them to Jahannam wa bi'sal masir. Exhuming the body of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra was a crime and a red line in a manner that Amir al-Mu'mineen himself says, in regards to my rights, I have exercised patience, but your transgression towards Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is something that shall not happen. The people of Saqifa were very well familiar with the heroics of Amir al-Mu'mineen from Badr and Uhud and Khaybar and Khandaq and Hunayn. For they returned back to their homes. And in this manner, till today, and until the reappearance of the awaited Imam Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, the grave of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen Ruhi lahal fida remains unknown. And so long as it is unknown, it is a clear and a loud call to each and every one of us to stand up in support of the Madhlumiyyah of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen in a manner that is eloquent and peaceful, driven by proof and dalil. Having said this, Ahibai, I would like to narrate for you the tragedy and the narrative. I would like to recount for you the tragedies by way of a narrative for the last days of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam, until the time that she was buried by Amir al-Mu'mineen in the darkness of the night. And as we travel through the journey of this maqtal, take your pure hearts to Medina al-Munawwara and see these tragedies unfold in front of you. All of this with the barakat of allowed salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajah. When the martyrdom of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, upon his martyrdom, Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam spent her days mourning and weeping over her father. She would go out to the graves of the Shuhada every Tuesday and every Thursday. She would sit by the grave of Hamza, weeping and crying, and she would recount the days and the stances of her father Rasulullah. It is narrated that every day that passed after the martyrdom of Rasulullah, the grief of Sayyidah Zahra would intensify. Every day her grief would be more than the day before. And on the seventh day after the martyrdom of Rasulullah, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra went to his grave in Masjidun Nabawi, weeping and wailing, crying out, Wa Abata wa Safiya wa Muhammada wa Aba Qasima man lil Qiblati wal Musalla man li ibnatika al wahila thukala. O Father, O Rasulallah, who is there to uphold the Qibla? Who is there to uphold the Musalla? Who is there to support your grieving daughter? Due to the intensity of her weeping, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra was not able to see, so she tripped over her hijab and she fell onto the grave of Rasulullah. She fainted due to the intensity of her grief. For the women of Bani Hashim who were around her poured some water on her face. When Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra regained consciousness, she began to weep again, saying and crying out, O my father, O Rasulullah, I do not find anyone after you to wipe my tears, and I am left lonely and abandoned without you. We have lost the revelation after you, and Jibreel does not descend anymore. Ya Abata, the world has lost its dunya. The world has lost its nur after you. Ya Abata, amsayna ba'daka min al-mustada'afin. Ya Abata, asbaha an-nasu amna mu'ridin. O Father, O Rasulullah, indeed, after you we have become oppressed. O Father, after you the people have become our opponents and have become enemies towards us. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra then took a handful of earth from the grave of Rasulullah. She picked up a handful of dust and earth from the grave of Rasulullah, and she began to smell the fragrance from the earth. She then cried out in a painful voice, ماذا على من شم تربة أحمد أن لا يشم مدى الزمان غواليا قل للمغيب تحت أطباق الثرى إن كنت تسمع صرختي وندائي شبت علي المصائب لو أنها صبت على الأيام سرنا لياليا. Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra cried out, the difficulties that have fallen upon me, had they fallen upon the days, they would have turned into nights. Allah, Allah, what are the difficulties and the tragedies that Sayeda Zahra is referring to? Is this the broken rib for the time she was crushed between the door and the wall? Allah, Allah, is this the manner in which Ibn Sahak slapped her across the face, bruising her eye? Is this the manner in which she was kicked in her stomach, losing Mohsin? Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra spent most of her days and nights weeping out of grief. So the shuyukh of Medina came to Amir al-Mu'mineen and they said to him, O Abul Hassan, Fatima cries in the day and she cries in the night. Due to this, we cannot enjoy our sleep, and during the day, we cannot focus on earning our livelihoods. So tell Fatima to weep either in the morning or to weep in the night. The reality is that the weeping of Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra demonstrated her oppression and the oppression of the successor of Rasulullah Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. Her weeping was a reminder of the disobedience of the Ummah towards Rasulullah, which then aroused their guilt. In any case, Amirul Mu'mineen conveyed the message to Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra. Sayyida Fatima replied by saying, ما أقل مكثي بينهم وما أكر مغيبي من بين أظهرهم فوالله لا أسكت ليلا ولا نهارا أو ألحق بأبي رسول الله. Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra said, my days amongst these people are very few, and I shall disappear from them, and I shall be unknown to them for a long time. By Allah, never shall I stop crying, neither in the day nor in the night, until I meet my father, Rasulullah. Amirul Mu'mineen then built a house for Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra known as Bayt al-Ahzan in Jannatul Baqi. Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra would go there every morning with Imam Hassan and Hussein. She would go holding their hands. Allah, Allah, the alim says, I wonder the manner in which Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra would walk to Baytul Ahzan. It is as if her back was bent due to the tragedies and due to the wounds and the pains that was inflicted on her. She would have one hand on her broken rib, and on the other hand she would hold the hand of Hassan al-Hussein. Imam Sahib al-Amri was Zaman says, what reason is there for us to smile in life after the building of Baytul Ahzan? Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra would weep in Baytul Ahzan from morning, and in the evening Amirul Mu'mineen would bring her back home. During the last days of her life, Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra had become weak and pale. she would lose consciousness time and again. This is due to the attacks that were carried out against her. She was filled with grief and pain. For one day she asked for Bilal, the companion of Rasulullah, and she sent a request for Bilal to give the adhan, for indeed the voice of Bilal and the adhan of Bilal reminded Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra the days of her father Rasulullah. Bilal had refused to give the adhan since the event of Saqifa as a protest to refuse his acknowledgement of the Khalifa selected by the people in opposition to the Khalifa selected by Allah. For Bilal, upon the request of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, ascended onto the place to give the mimbar inside of Masjidun Nabawi. Bilal began by saying, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra replied, indeed, God is greater. Bilal then went on to say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra then replied, I also attest that there is no God but Allah. When Bilal reached the point of the adhan and said, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, hearing the voice of hearing the name of her father in the adhan, she began to weep and she began to cry until she fainted. Sayyidah Fidda sent Bilal a message to the masjid, stop the adhan lest the daughter of Rasulullah perishes with grief. Close to her martyrdom, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra saw Rasulullah in her dream. She complained to him about how she was treated by the Ummah. For Rasulullah replied to her and said, لَكِ الدَّارِ الْآخِرَةِ الَّتِي أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ وَإِنَّكِ قَادِمَةٌ عَلَيَّ عَنْ قُرْبٍ. The Prophet replied to her and said, O my daughter, you shall be rewarded in the Akhirah, for indeed it is the abode of the ones who have taqwa. Indeed, you will be returning back to me very soon. As Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra's condition became worse, 3 days before her martyrdom, she said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, the time of my departure has now arrived. O Abul Hassan, I would like to convey my wasiyah to you. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen sat by the side of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, and then Sayyidah Zahra said to him, ever since my pledge to you, I have never lied, nor have I ever deceived you, and I have never disobeyed you since my marriage to you. فأمير المؤمنين عليه السلام replied, معاذ الله أنت أعلم بالله وأبر وأتقى وأكرم وأشد خوفا من الله أن أوبخك بمخالفتي. I seek refuge in Allah. You are more knowledgeable, more pious and kind than to disobey me. Amirul Mu'mineen continued and said, قَدْ عَزَّ عَلَيِّ مُفَارَقَتُكِ وَفَقْدُكِ إِلَّا أَنَّهُ أَمْرٌ لَا بُدَّ مِنْهُ والله جددت علي مصيبة رسول الله وقد عظمت وفاتك وفقدك. Amirul Mu'mineen says, O daughter of Rasulullah, O Fatima, your separation from me is difficult to bear But death is but an occurrence, an eventuality that must happen. Indeed, my grief over the martyrdom of Rasulullah has been renewed through your death and through your loss. فإنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون من مصيبة أفجعها وأعلمها وأمذها وأحزنها. هذه مصيبة لا أزاء لها ورزية لا خلف لها. Amir al-Mu'mineen, with tears in his eyes, continued to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Indeed, how great is this tragedy, the death of Fatima. How painful is it for me. How deep is this wound? Indeed, this is a tragedy for which there is no consolation. Amirul Mu'mineen and Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra both began weeping for some time. فأخذ علي عليه السلام رأسها وضمها على صدره. Amirul Mu'mineen then placed the head of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra on his chest. He then hugged her and told her, Grant me your final wishes, your wasiyah, for indeed you shall find me loyal in fulfilling them in the manner that you ask. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra then began with her final wasiyah. She said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, My wasiyah to you is that you marry Umama. She will be a good mother for my children, and she shall be a good companion for you. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra then continued and said, I do not want any one of those who oppressed me to attend my funeral. Indeed, they are my enemies and the enemies of Rasulullah. Do not let them pray over me. Do not let anyone who follows them pray over me either. I wish for you to bury me in the darkness of the night, and no one should know of my grave. I want you to give me the ghusl and the kafan, and you should lead the prayer over me, O Abul Hassan. I want you to lower me into my grave. And when you lower me in the grave and you cover my grave, I want you to sit by my side and recite the Quran. I leave you, O Abul Hassan, in the care of Allah, and I ask you to take care of my children, Hassan, Hussein, Zainab, and Kulthum, for indeed their age is very tender, and they are in need of a loving parent. Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi says that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra then began to weep. So Amirul Mu'mineen asked her, O Fatima, why do you weep? Sayyidah Zahra replied by saying, Abki lima talqi ba'di. I cry for you, O Abul Hassan, for what shall befall upon you from the tragedies after me. فقال لها لا تبقي فوالله إن ذلك لصغير عندي في ذات الله. For Abul Hassan replied, Do not cry over me, O Fatima. Indeed, every tragedy that I face is small for me when I look at it through the eyes of Allah. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra then called for her daughter, Sayyidah Zainab al-Kubra. She then gave her the shirt of Nabiullah Ibrahim al-Khalil and she said to her, O my daughter Zainab, give this shirt to your brother Al Hussein when he asks for it. He shall ask for this shirt, for it will be on the day before you are separated from him. Allah, Allah. This was the shirt Sayyid al-Shuhada had asked for on the day of Ashura before going into the Maidan. And then Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra said to Sayyida Zainab, I shall give you and Amana, a trust that I would like for you to carry out on the final day of the life of your brother Hussein. Sayyida Zainab looked at her mother. Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra said to Sayyida Zainab, kiss the neck of Imam al-Hussein on my behalf. Why, ya Zahra? Kiss the neck of Imam al-Hussein on my behalf. This is the same neck and the same spot on which the sword of Shimar shall fall upon. On the day of the Shahada of Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra, on a day like this, Sayyida Zahra prepared the meal for her children. She washed the hair for Imam Hassan and Hussein and she sent them to the masjid. She then sent Sayyida Zainab and Sayyida Kulthum to the house of one of the women from Bani Hashim. She did this so that the children would not witness the death of their mother. Asma bint Umays was the only one in the house. Allah, Allah. These are the final moments of Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra's life. Ya Shi'at Fatima. Sayyida Zahra went into her room and she lay down on the ground facing the Qibla. The veils of the ghaib were lifted and she was heard to say, Assalamu alayka ya Jibreel, Assalamu ala Rasulillah. اللهم مع رسولك اللهم في رضوانك اللهم في جوارك Allah, Allah. Oh Allah, place me with your Prophet. Oh Allah, place me in your mercy. Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra said to Umays, I shall be in a state of tasbih and tahleel, for when you hear my voice has stopped and you hear no more from the tasbih, then you know that I have left the dunya and my soul has ascended. Asma bint Umays says, I was trembling and waited outside the door, keenly listening to the tasbih and the tahleel of my master Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra. In between the tasbih, I heard Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra say, هذه مواكب أهل السماوات هذا جبرائيل وهذا رسول الله. Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra said, these are the dwellers of the heavens who have come to receive me and who have come to take me. Here is Jibreel. Here is Rasulullah, my father Rasulullah, calling me towards him. Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra then showed the angel of death. He greeted her and she replied, Wa alayka salam, Ya qabid al-arwah, Ya Malak al-maut. Peace be upon you, O the one who extracts the souls, O the angel of death. And then she cried out, ثم قالت إليك ربي لا إلى النار. I come towards you, O my Lord. ثم غمضت عينيها ومددت يديها ورجليها Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra then closed her eyes. She straightened her hands, she straightened her legs. She then recited the Shahadatain. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله وفارقت روحها الدنيا. The soul of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra left her body. رحم الله من نادى يا فاطمة ومصيبة وشهيدا. Asma bint Umays began to weep when she heard no more the voice of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Asma bint Umays began to weep uncontrollably over the tragedy as she saw the lifeless body of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra in front of her. It was very soon until Imamain al-Hassan and Hussein came running into the house. How should Asma tell the young children that their mother has passed away? She quickly wiped her tears and she went to the door to greet the Imamain. Imam al-Hassan immediately asked Asma, Aina ummuna? Where is our mother? فسكتت أسماء فأحس الحسن والحسين بوقوع المصيبة. For when Asma was silent and she didn't reply to them, the two Imams felt that something is not right. Imam Hassan asked Asma, where is our mother? But she kept quiet. Imam al-Hassan and Hussein sensed that something was not right. They rushed into the room only to see their mother Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra lying still on the ground. Imam al-Hussein rushed towards her. He began to shake the shoulder of Sayyidah Fatima, but she was no more alive. Imam al-Hassan threw himself by his mother. He kissed her on the forehead and he painfully cried out, يا أمّا كلميني قبل أن تفارق روحي بدني. Imam al-Hassan cried out, oh my mother, please talk to me before my soul leaves my body. وأقبل الحسين عليه السلام يقبل رجليها ويقول يا أماه أنا ابنك الحسين كلميني قبل أن يتصدع قلبي فأموت. Imam al-Hussein kissed the feet of his mother Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra and began to cry. He said, oh my mother, talk to me before I die out of grief. Asma then hugged the Imamain and she asked them to go to the masjid and to inform their father Amirul Mu'mineen about the death of their mother Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. The two Imams ran out of the house, weeping and wailing in the loudest of voices. The people thought that the two children must be missing their grandfather. So they entered into the mosque and they saw their father Amirul Mu'mineen. They went running towards him and both of them, Imam Hassan and Hussein, in the same voice cried out. They said, Kad matat ummuna Fatima. They said to Amirul Mu'mineen, our mother Fatima is dead. Allah, Allah, ya Shia. What was the reaction of Amirul Mu'mineen? The hadith says that when Imam al Hassan and Hussein conveyed the news of the death of Sayeda Fatima to Amirul Mu'mineen, the reaction of the Mawla was what? The hadith says, Fawaka al Amiru ala wajhi. Amirul Mu'mineen fell down face first into the masjid when he heard the news. They told Amirul Mu'mineen, our mother Fatima has died. Amirul Mu'mineen fell to the ground face first. Amirul Mu'mineen began to weep and said, Bimanil Azaya bint Muhammad. كنت بك أتعزى ففيما العزى من بعدك. Amirul Mu'mineen cried out and said, who will console me now, O daughter of Muhammad? I used to get consolation through you. Indeed, there is no consolation after you. Amirul Mu'mineen then carried Imam Hassan and Hussein home to prepare for the final rites of the news. To prepare for the final rites. The news of the death of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra had begun to spread across the city of Medina. The women of Bani Hashim gathered in the house and they began to weep and wail, Ya Sayyidata, Ya Binta Rasulillah. Voices were heard wailing and crying. The men of Medina came home to give condolences to Amirul Mu'mineen, only to find Imam Ali seated in a corner of the house, hugging Hassan and Hussein, Zainab and Kulthum, while all of them were crying. The people of Medina surrounded the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen, waiting to participate in the funeral. But Amir al-Mu'mineen commanded Abu Dhar to announce to the people that the funeral has been delayed. When the people heard this, they assumed that the burial would take place the next day. They then began to disperse from around the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When a part of the night had passed, the darkness of the skies had shadowed itself over Medina. The Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen began to give the final ghusl to Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, while Asma bint Umays would pass him the water. At one time during the ghusl, Amirul Mu'mineen screamed out and he began to cry. He took a few steps back and sat on the ground, his head on his knees, weeping and wailing. Asma came and she said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, O my master, you are a brave warrior and you are the embodiment of sabr. If you do not have patience and you break down like this, then how will we, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, have patience to face the tragedy? Amirul Mu'mineen tearfully looked up and replied back to Asma and said, while giving the ghusl, I felt the broken rib. I felt the broken rib of Fatima. After completing the ghusl, Amirul Mu'mineen said, Allahumma innaha amatuk wa ibnatu rasulik wa safiyuka wa khiyaratuka min khalkik. Amirul Mu'mineen said, Ya Allah, this is Fatima. Indeed, she is your servant, the daughter of your prophet, and the most pure and elevated of your creation. Allahumma lakinha hujjataha wa a'zim burhanaha وأعلي درجتها واجمع بينها وبين أبيها. Ya Allah, strengthen her argument, elevate her status, and unite her with her father, Rasulullah. After completing the ghusl, the Imam wrapped Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra in 7 layers of kafan. He placed on her the remainder of the hunut which Jibreel had brought down from Jannah for Rasulullah. Amirul Mu'mineen then brought the body of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra and he placed it in the middle of the house and he untied the coffin from the face. فنادى بصوت مختنق بالبكاء يا حسن يا حسين يا زينب يا أم كلثوم حلموا وتزودوا من أمكم فاطمة فهذا آخر الفراق واللقاء في الجنة. Amirul Mu'mineen cried out in a painful voice, O Hassan, O Hussein, O Zainab, O Kulthum, come and see your mother for one final time, and after this the separation shall be long, and after this you will meet her again in Jannah. The children rushed towards Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, hugging her and crying, the tears of the children falling on the coffin of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Imamain al-Hassan and Hussein were crying, saying, O mother, when you meet Rasulullah, grant our salams to him and tell him that after when he left the dunya we have been treated as orphans and we have been oppressed. Amirul Mu'mineen says, Inni ushhidullah annaha hannat wa annat wa maddat yadayha wa dhammathuma ila sadriha. Amirul Mu'mineen says, when Imam Hassan and Hussein began to cry, and they said, O mother, we have become orphans after you have left us. As soon as they said this, Amirul Mu'mineen says, I swear by Allah as my witness, as the children cried, Fatima sighed with a deep sigh of grief, and from within the coffin she extended her arms and she embraced Imam Hassan and Hussein. وَإِذَا بِهَا وإذا بحاطف من السماء ينادي يا علي ارفع الحسنين فقد أبكيا ملائكة السماء. Amirul Mu'mineen says, at this moment a voice from the heavens cried out, Ya Ali, Ya Abul Hassan, take back Imam al-Hassan and Hussein, for indeed the angels of the heaven are weeping for them. In the darkness of the night, Amirul Mu'mineen then recited the Salat over Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. There were only a handful of companions whom she had allowed, the likes of Salman and Abu Dhar. The Imam then went on to bury Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra in the darkness of the night, in a grave which is unknown, while the people of Medina were deep in slumber and in sleep. As Amirul Mu'mineen was lowering Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra into the grave, Amirul Mu'mineen said, يا أرض أستودعك وديعتي هذه بنت رسول الله. O earth, I am granting in your care that amana that I was entrusted with. This is the daughter of Rasulullah. Amirul Mu'minin began to lower the body of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra into the grave. He said, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Bismillahi wa billah. وعلى ملة رسول الله Muhammad ibn Abdullah. He then cried, he then began to weep. Amirul Mu'mineen slowly began to cover the grave of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra with earth. Allah, Allah. This is Amirul Mu'mineen covering the grave of Fatima. Tomorrow Fatima will be in Karbala, sitting by the mangled body of Aba Abdullah. Your tragedy is great, your tragedy is great, O Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen. But you had Ali to bury you and to cover your grave. Now come and sit. Sayyidah Zahra shall sit and weep by the unburied body of Aba Abdullah in Karbala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Matame Hussein, Matame Fatima.